In Central Park on a crisp autumn afternoon, Oliver Reed, a powerful business tycoon, sought respite after closing a massive corporate deal. The weight of boardroom negotiations melted away in the fresh air until suddenly, his chest tightened painfully. He'd forgotten his inhaler. Struggling to breathe, panic crept through him as he clutched his chest and stumbled toward a nearby bench. His hands trembled violently as he sank down, gasping desperately for air. His vision blurred while the world continued around him, joggers running past, couples walking dogs, an elderly man feeding birds. No one noticed his silent struggle. No one stopped. And Oliver couldn't call out this breath was too shallow. That's when Ethan, a bright-eyed 10-year-old boy playing nearby, noticed something wrong. His soccer ball had rolled off the path, and as he chased after it, he caught sight of the man in obvious distress. Without hesitation, with a single-second thought, Ethan sprinted over, alarm flashing in his young eyes. "Sir, are you okay?" Ethan asked, his voice filled with genuine concern. Oliver opened his mouth, but only a whisper of air escaped as he gripped the bench tightly, his eyes pleading for help. Ethan quickly reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out his own inhaler. "Here, use mine," he said, placing it firmly in Oliver's trembling hand. With weak, shaking fingers, Oliver brought the inhaler to his lips and took a deep puff. He held the breath, then slowly exhaled before taking another. Gradually, the world stopped spinning as air returned to his lungs. The panic began to recede. His chest still ached, but his mind cleared. He looked at the boy in disbelief, still catching his breath. "You just saved me," he managed to say, his voice gravelly but sincere. Ethan smiled warmly. "My mom always says we should help people when we can." Moments later, a woman in a diner uniform hurried down the path, wiping her hands on her apron while scanning for her son. This was Rebecca, Ethan's mother, who had just finished her shift and come to walk her son home. When she spotted Ethan with a stranger, her steps quickened. "Ethan, everything all right?" she called, already moving protectively toward them, her eyes flicking from the man to the inhaler in his hand. Ethan nodded confidently. "He couldn't breathe, so I gave him mine." Oliver stood, steadier now though still pale. He carefully tucked the inhaler into his coat pocket as if it were something precious. "Your son helped me when no one else did. He's got a heart of gold." Rebecca looked down at Ethan, then back at the man. She gave a polite but weary smile. "I'm just glad he was there." Oliver reached into his wallet and pulled out a sleek business card, its gold-embossed lettering glinting in the sunlight. "I'm Oliver Reed," he said with quiet authority. "I'd really appreciate staying in touch. You both have given me more than you realize." Rebecca hesitated momentarily before taking the card. "Thank you," she said quietly, unsure what else to offer. Oliver nodded, his eyes lingering on Ethan with something like wonder before turning to walk away toward his waiting car. He'd be going to the hospital as a precaution, but his thoughts remained fixed on the boy who had changed something fundamental within him. That night, Ethan excitedly recounted everything over a modest dinner of leftovers and toast, waving his hands animatedly as he relived each second. Rebecca listened with a smile, absently running her thumb over the business card still resting on their kitchen table. "Reed Enterprises," it read in elegant script. She'd heard the name before in news broadcasts, in passing conversations at the diner, occasionally mentioned in the business section of newspapers. He was one of the wealthiest men in the city. The phone rang. Rebecca answered cautiously. "Hello. Good evening. This is Oliver Reed. I hope I'm not calling too late." His voice was warmer than before, still carrying that deep, commanding tone, but softened now. "No, it's all right," she replied, glancing at Ethan, who was already leaning forward curiously. "I just wanted to thank your son again. Really, I can't stop thinking about it." "I'm glad he could help," she said. "That's just who he is." "I was hoping," Oliver continued, "that you might both come to my home tomorrow. I'd like to speak with you properly." Rebecca hesitated. The invitation sounded formal, almost surreal, but something in his voice was undeniably genuine. "All right, we'll come." The next morning arrived with a quiet stillness kind that only visits when something unusual, something important, is about to happen. Sunlight crept through the modest blinds of their small apartment, where Rebecca stood before the mirror, adjusting the collar of her only good blouse. Her hands trembled slightly, not from fear but uncertainty. In the reflection, Ethan stood at her bedroom doorway, dressed in his neatest clothes, hair slicked to the side with effort and pride. A nervous energy filled the room, the same kind that settles before a new chapter begins. "Do I look okay, Mom?" Ethan asked, tugging at his jacket sleeves. Rebecca turned and smiled warmly. "You look perfect." He smiled back with that unfiltered, innocent grin that only children possess, the kind that could break through even the most hardened hearts. It still felt surreal, the events of the previous day. A normal afternoon in the park, an act of kindness, and a stranger in need. Except the stranger wasn't ordinary. He was Oliver Reed, one of the most powerful businessmen in the city. And today, they were invited to his home. A sleek black car pulled up outside their building precisely on time. Ethan's eyes widened as he stepped outside it, had only seen cars like this in movies. The driver stepped out, tipped his hat respectfully, and opened the door. Rebecca hesitated, holding Ethan's hand a little tighter. This wasn't her world: polished leather seats, the scent of cologne and cedar, the velvet-like silence. Still, she climbed in, her heart thundering like a drum. The drive through the city felt dreamlike. Concrete buildings gradually thinned, replaced by open spaces and manicured lawns. Then came the iron Getestel, black, an ornate-grading estate that resembled a palace more than a house. As the gates opened and the car turned up a winding driveway, Rebecca and Ethan stared out at the sprawling grounds. Fountains, statues, and rows of roses stretched like red ribbons across the lawn. The house itself rose with quiet grandeur, framed by marble pillars and tall glass windows that shimmered in the morning light. The car came to a gentle stop. The front door opened before they even reached it, and there stood Oliver, no longer the man gasping for breath on a park bench, but a poised and smiling host dressed in a crisp light sweater and tailored trousers. He looked nothing like the powerful executive Rebecca had imagined. He looked like someone simply happy to see them. "Welcome," Oliver said, stepping forward with genuine warmth. "It's so good to see you again." Ethan smiled shyly and waved. Rebecca nodded, her voice caught somewhere between awe and uncertainty. Come in," Oliver urged, ushering them inside. The interior of the house was stunning. A grand staircase swept upward toward a vaulted ceiling with a chandelier that sparkled like a sky of stars. The floors were marble, the walls lined with paintings that looked older than any book Rebecca had ever owned. But despite its grandeur, there was something warm about the home. It didn't feel cold or pretentious. It felt peaceful. Oliver led them into a sitting room filled with soft cream-colored furniture, sunlight pouring in through towering windows. A fireplace crackled gently at one end, and the scent of fresh flowers filled the air. "Please, sit," Oliver offered, gesturing to the couch. Rebecca sat stiffly at first, careful not to touch anything. Ethan sank into the cushion beside her, eyes wide with wonder, quietly absorbing everything around him. "I wanted to invite you both here," Oliver began, his voice steady but gentle, "because what happened yesterday wasn't just an emergency to me. It was a moment that changed something." Rebecca tilted her head, listening intently. "I've spent most of my life in offices and conference rooms. I've worked 12-hour days since I was your son's age, and I've won things: contracts, awards, recognition. But none of that compares to the moment I realized a small boy with nothing to gain would run up to a stranger in need and hand him something that could have saved his own life." He looked at Ethan now, his eyes warm with admiration. "You didn't ask who I was. You didn't hesitate. You just helped. That kind of kindness, it's rare. It's priceless." Ethan looked down, cheeks coloring with embarrassment. "So," Oliver continued, turning to Rebecca, "I thought a lot last night, and I realized I don't want this to end with a thank you. I want to do something for you. For both of you." Rebecca sat up straighter, her fingers clutching at the hem of her blouse nervously. Oliver reached for a folder on the table, opened it slowly, and slid a few documents toward her. "This is a transfer of funds $1 million. It will be deposited into a secure trust under your name. No strings, no expectations, a gift." Rebecca froze. Her breath caught in her throat. She opened her mouth, then closed it again, as if her mind refused to process the moment. $2 million, she echoed softly. And Oliver added, I've also selected 3 homes across the city. You can choose any of them. They're fully paid for, move-in ready. No more rent. No more worries about leaking ceilings or broken heaters. Rebecca shook her head, almost dazed. Mr. Reed, we can't accept this. It's too much. No, Oliver said, smiling gently. It's exactly enough, because your son gave me something I didn't even know I was missing. That moment in the park, it changed me. He reminded me that people matter more than profit, that small actions have enormous power, and I want to return that gift. Rebecca's eyes brimmed with tears. She reached for Ethan's hand. We've never had this kind of help before, she whispered. That's exactly why you deserve it, he replied simply. There was silence in the room, but it wasn't awkward, it was sacred. Ethan looked up at his mother. Mom, we could have our own house, and you wouldn't have to work so much. Rebecca nodded, eyes now overflowing. She looked at Oliver, her voice trembling. Thank you. Truly. I don't even know how to say it. You already did, Oliver replied. The moment you raised a boy who would give his only inhaler to a stranger. The rest of the morning unfolded in warmth. Oliver gave them a tour of the estate, showed Ethan his library full of books, maps, and stories. He told them about the homes they could choose from, each with yards, spacious kitchens, and room to breathe. When it was time to leave, Oliver stood at the door, hands in his pockets. This isn't a goodbye, he said. It's just the beginning. Ethan gave him a hug, quick and clumsy but sincere. Oliver chuckled and ruffled his hair affectionately. Back in the car, as they pulled away from the estate, Rebecca held the folder on her lap like it was a miracle. Ethan leaned against her shoulder, tired but glowing. The world outside looked different now, not because it had changed, but because they had. The wind carried a soft scent of spring through the open windows, rustling the sheer white curtains of their new home, as if the walls themselves were breathing with relief. Outside, sunlight painted everything in soft amber-trimmed grass, the freshly planted flower beds, the quiet sidewalk where neighbors walked by with dogs and easy smiles. Inside, Rebecca stood in the middle of the kitchen, still, her hands wrapped around a warm cup of tea. The hum of a new refrigerator played softly in the background. It was quiet, not the kind of quiet born of emptiness, but the kind that came with peace. Weeks had passed since she and Ethan left behind their cramped apartment, with its flickering bathroom light and heating that coughed more than it worked. This house felt different. The light reached every corner. The walls were thick enough to hold in laughter and dreams, but not so thick as to shut the world out. It was theirs, all theirs. Ethan came sprinting down the stairs, socked feet sliding slightly on the polished wood. Mom, he called, excitement bouncing in his voice. The movers put up my posture, one with the spaceship. His eyes gleamed as if he had just placed a personal flag on the moon. Rebecca smiled, setting her cup down. That's great, sweetheart. Want to show me? He took her hand without waiting for an answer and pulled her upstairs. His room was filled with sunlight and newness. A wide window looked out onto the backyard where a small tire swing already hung from a low oak branch. On the wall above his bed was the poster in question, a sleek rocket ship, blasting off into the stars. I put it up so I can see it when I wake up, Ethan said proudly. It reminds me that I can go anywhere. Rebecca blinked quickly, her throat tightening. It had only been a few weeks, but it already felt like the life they had come from. The long shifts at the diner, the worry over rent, the patched clothes and secondhand school supplies belonged to someone else, someone far behind them. That afternoon, as the sun tilted westward and shadows stretched long and lazy across the floor, the doorbell rang. Ethan got there first. A small envelope lay on the welcome mat, a stamp, no return address, just his mother's name in elegant handwriting. Rebecca opened it slowly. Inside was a single sheet of fine paper, thick and smooth, with a message written in ink that looked almost handwritten. Kindness always finds its way back. Stay true to yourself, Oliver. Beneath it was another sheet, a legal document. Her eyes skimmed the words, but the meaning struck her instantly. It was a scholarship for Ethan. Full tuition. Any school, any dream, any place he chose to go. Rebecca's hands trembled. She sat down, the letter in her lap. Ethan looked at her curiously. What does it say? She turned to him, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks. "It says your future is already waiting for you. You just have to go chase it." He smiled, not quite understanding the weight of it all, but happy to see her happy. That evening, they cooked dinner together, not out of necessity but for joy. They made tomato basil pasta, laughing as Ethan accidentally flung a noodle at the backsplash. The table was set with care, even the napkins folded. Rebecca poured herself a glass of wine, something she hadn't done in years, and they sat down, the soft clink of cutlery mingling with the sound of wind outside. "I like it here," Ethan said as he twirled spaghetti. "I don't miss the old place." Rebecca reached over and squeezed his hand. "Me neither." Later, as night slipped in and stars peeked through the curtains, Rebecca stood by the window with the letter in her hand. She thought about Oliver Reed, not as the billionaire everyone whispered about in boardrooms and magazines, but as the man on the bench, gasping for breath. A man who had been humbled not by circumstance, but by a boy's selfless act. And he had remembered not just with words, but with action. She folded the letter neatly and placed it in the top drawer of her desk, beside her course materials. Something about the act felt ceremonial, like laying the first brick of a new life. Days turned into weeks, and the rhythm of their new world settled in. Ethan made friends in the neighborhood. Rebecca cooked more than she ordered in. The sound of laughter in their home became commonplace. Occasionally, a note would arrive from Oliver, always brief. Sometimes just a quote or a reminder to keep dreaming. He never visited unannounced, never intruded. But his presence lingered like a good scent in a favorite room. One Saturday morning, as Rebecca tended to her gardenia new passion that involved more trial and error, then Ethan ran outside holding a brochure. "Mom, look, it's a summer space camp. Real astronauts come." He was breathless, hopeful. Rebecca took the brochure and smiled. "Then we'll sign you up." And they did easily, without calculating what it would cost, without guilt. It was the first time in her life she had said yes without hesitation. Ethan returned from that camp different, older, wiser, filled with questions about the stars, propulsion systems, and what it felt like to float. His mind burned with possibilities, and Rebecca saw its spark. She recognized it because she had once had it too. They began to dream out loud. Rebecca would open her cafe one day, maybe call it the Hearth, where food wasn't just served but felt nourishing, comforting, like home. Ethan started keeping a journal of invention ideas and future plans. Some were simple, others wildly imaginative, but all were anchored in belief. Sometimes when Rebecca would sit in the quiet after Ethan had gone to bed, she'd think of how close they had come to never having this. How easily that day in the park could have gone not a said a boy, a man, and a breath. How delicate the thread was that had connected them, and how strong it had become. She knew Oliver had done more than offer them a new life. He had believed in their worth without needing proof. He had seen value not in resumes or income, but in character. That kind of faith had changed everything. Years would pass. Ethan would grow taller than her. His voice would deepen. The house would gain more photos on the walls, more memories etched into the floors and the spaces between holidays. Rebecca's cafe would open small at first, then steady, then loved by locals. And the letter, the one with that simple message, would remain in the drawer, a reminder of where it all began. Because kindness, when given freely, never fades. It plants roots, grows in silence, and blossoms where it's least expected. And when it returns tenfold. Ethan once asked her, late one night under the stars, "Do you think that one day I'll be able to do something like that for someone else?" She looked at him, silhouetted by moonlight, a boy with a heart too big for the world to ignore. "You already have," she whispered. "But yes, one day you'll do even more." And he would. Because the story hadn't ended with the house or the scholarship or the letter. It was just beginning. Ethan didn't start volunteering because someone told him to. He did it because something inside him had shifted that day in the park, and it never shifted back. The moment he handed his inhaler to a gasping stranger, a simple, instinctive act, hadn't known it would lead to a beautiful home, a scholarship, and more importantly, a new kind of life. As the years passed, Ethan entered college with a quiet confidence, the kind that came from having been shaped by gratitude and grounded in purpose. He kept volunteering, not because he had to, but because it remained the most honest part of his week. He mentored younger kids who had trouble finding their place, tutored them, helped them build confidence, and even introduced a few to the stars with his telescope, same telescope Oliver had gifted him 2 birthdays ago. By the time he graduated, Ethan had earned additional scholarships on top of the one Oliver had set aside. Universities competed for him, not just because of his grades, but because of who he was. He chose a school known for its astrophysics program. Before he left for college, Oliver invited him to dinner. It was a quiet meal, just the two of them at Oliver's Estetith same house where, years before, Oliver had offered them the kind of gift that couldn't be repaid. Over grilled salmon and roasted vegetables, Oliver said, "I have no doubt you'll go on to do incredible things. But remember this, Ethan, your greatness doesn't depend on how far you go. It depends on how many hands you reach for along the way." Ethan nodded, his eyes misty. "You changed my life," he said quietly. "No," Oliver replied, placing a hand on his shoulder. "You changed mine." Years later, long after college, Ethan returned to the CityNet as a child, but as a grown man. A scientist, a dreamer still. He'd taken a job with a private space exploration firm, and his work was helping shape the way humanity looked at the stars. But one rainy afternoon, while walking back from a meeting, he turned a corner and saw someone slumped on a bench shoulder, maybe 60, coughing into his coat, pale hands shaking. There was no hesitation. Ethan approached. "Sir, are you all right?" The man looked up, startled, wheezing. "Asthma," he managed to say. "Forgot my inhaler." Ethan reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a spare something he always carried, just in case. "Here," he said gently, placing it into the man's hand. The man took 2 deep breaths, closed his eyes, then exhaled. "Thank you," he whispered. "You didn't have to." "I know," Ethan said, smiling gently. "But I wanted to." He waited with the man until help arrived, and as he walked away, heart steady, shoulders lifted, he knew something had come full circle. Not because he expected a reward or recognition, but because in that moment, the world had offered him a chance to give back what he'd once received: a breath, a break, a beginning. He visited Oliver the following week. The man was older now, his hair silvering, his steps a little slower, but his eyes still held that same spark. "I helped someone," Ethan said after recounting the story. Oliver smiled. "Then you've done more than I ever could." They sat together for a while in silence, watching the garden sway in the afternoon breeze. Ethan looked toward the sky, where soft clouds drifted like ships. "You were right," he said at last. "About what?" "One act of kindness. It really can change a life." Oliver nodded, his voice barely above a whisper. "It changed mine." And that, Ethan knew, was the legacy they'd built together. Not carved in stone or announced on stages, but in moments. Quiet, simple, powerful. The kind that ripple outward farther than anyone can measure. The kind that lasts forever. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the power of kindness. Stories like Ethan and Oliver's remind us that the smallest gestures can create ripples that transform lives in ways we may never fully comprehend. If this tale of compassion, generosity, and human connection touched your heart, we invite you to become part of our growing Whispers of the Soul community. By subscribing to our channel, you'll receive more stories that illuminate the beauty of the human spirit, narratives that inspire, comfort, and remind us of our shared humanity in an often disconnected world. Each week, we carefully craft stories that explore life's deepest emotions and most profound moments. From unexpected kindness between strangers to the quiet heroism of everyday people, our tales celebrate the whispers of goodness that often go unheard in our noisy world. Click the subscribe button below to ensure you never miss these moments of connection. Join thousands of others who have found inspiration, solace, and joy in our stories. Together, we can create a community that recognizes and honors the power of compassion in all its forms. Remember, like Ethan's simple act of offering his inhaler, your own kindness may be creating ripples you cannot yet see. We're here to celebrate those moments and the beautiful souls behind them. Whispers of the Soul, where stories touch hearts and kindness changes lives. Subscribe now and let the whispers reach you.